The Zelensky government is completely falling apart as corruption scandals continue to rock the regime. Corruption in Ukraine has become such a problem that the Western corporate media is finally forced to cover it after trying to bury the story for years. Top Ukrainian officials are resigning after a massive $100 million embezzlement scheme was recently uncovered. Higher-ranking Ukrainian officials from the state-owned energy company was caught stealing resources meant for repair and protection of Ukraine's critical energy infrastructure. So while the Ukrainian people was fighting for electricity and heat, fighting through blackouts, Zelensky's inner circle was stealing resources from the energy sector. This massive amount of corruption and mismanagement by the Zelensky regime has led to a massive amount of mistrust by the Ukrainian people for their own government. Already faced with massive pushback back at home, which led to massive election losses known as the Zelensky curse, now European leaders have to explain to their voters why we should continue to send money and resources to a corrupt state. Is it really worth starting World War III and potential nuclear war just so we can accept this corrupt state into NATO? Neo-Nazism continues to run rampant in Ukraine as the Ukrainian president honors the Azov Battalion and other Nazi brigades fighting in the Ukrainian military. Like, bro, you know we can literally see that Nazi insignia, right? They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Meanwhile, the Western media is still actively whitewashing Nazis in Ukraine. The Western media is in denial, despite the fact that Nazism in Ukraine is one of the main drivers of this conflict. You can't blame the Russian people for wanting to get rid of this Nazi scourge next to their border who is attacking and killing ethnic Russians in Ukraine. This is why the Western corporate media has been so aggressive about lying about Ukraine. They don't want the world to know that they are siding with the Nazis, because before the Russian special military operation, the Western media was clear that there was a Nazi problem in Ukraine. The corporate media used to talk about it all the time. In fact, the United States Congress used to have a ban from weapon sales going to neo-Nazi battalions in Ukraine. The West used to acknowledge the Nazi problem in Ukraine, but then they got the proxy war against Russia that they wanted. Now they call anyone who calls out the Nazi presence in Ukraine as repeating Russian talking points. They even have Google AI that is actively lying on behalf of the empire, claiming that Nazi presence in Ukraine is just Russian propaganda. Like, bro, we literally see their Nazi tattoos and insignias. The gaslighting is insane. It should be completely disturbing to everyone that our ruling class is willing to whitewash Nazis in Ukraine and are willing to completely rewrite our reality in order to serve their neocon agenda.
What's poppin'? My friends, my family, we are back. Once again, welcome to Nick at Prime Time. We have a lot to discuss, my friends, so let's get right to it. I have this new mic, by the way. I appreciate everyone who've been actively supporting my channel. I feel like we had a great launch month for this new channel that we got on Nick Cruse. And I was asking for some help so we can get a new mic here, like this shiny little thing. Let me know how it sounds. I'm not like an audio engineer or anything like that. Just let me know if the mic sounds good. I've been trying to fundraise to get a mic, and I got this. It's not anything too expensive. I hope it does the job. So let's dive right into this, because you have the West, and I think like global geopolitics isn't as complicated as a lot of people make it. Like, we still living in the aftermath of the Cold War, which was the capitalist class retaliation against the massive uprisings against capital. Like, everyone want to paint it as something else, as the Soviet Union engaging in struggle against their biggest rival, the United States. But I don't even think that's accurate. I think it's a response to to massive uprisings. And we see now the Trump administration, who is openly using the Monroe Doctrine to justify war crimes and pursuing endless war in Venezuela. What's popping, my friend? We got a super chat. What's good? What's popping? So geopolitics is essentially, because we understand that imperialism is a system, is a giant economic system, global economic system of capitalism. Imperialism and capitalism are intertwined. So we have the countries who are openly selling out to the West, and then we have everyone else who is managing and staying afloat in this international capitalist system where there are Nazi-aligned aggressors who are violating international law, who are waging war on the concept of international law. And what we are living through today shows that fascism has won. It's still the dominant narrative of the ruling class after the fascist ruling class did everything they can to fight against the massive uprising during the Cold War. It's a struggle between the global majority, people who love peace, and people who embrace Nazism, my friends. We call things fascist because we live in a fascist society, a deeply anti-communist society. And they have this resolution at the UN, which shows exactly why we're so supportive of Ukraine. This is a resolution to condemn Nazism. Look who voted against it. The entirety of the collective West. This is what I call the uncivil society. Russia, who consistently put these resolutions up. You guys know this is not new. So this is from almost 10 years ago. This is consistent. There's a consistent pro-Nazi, but it will never admit it, openly fascist strain in the ruling class in the West. That's why they support the genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza. They know exactly what they're doing when they arming the Azov battalion and the Banderites in Ukraine, which is why I have disdain for the people like Ro Khanna and the entirety of the NATO left who is supportive, and they still engage in Nazi denialism. Even though Zelensky is caught like around and praising and giving the world awards to Nazis in Ukraine, they still refuse to acknowledge that they're Nazis in Ukraine. Remember, Stan Cedar, he said it was overblown. The position of majority report is that it's a Russian talking point. There's no Nazis in Ukraine. So why is Ukraine voting against resolutions condemning Nazism? Why is the entirety of NATO voting to condemn Nazism? Look at all the countries that voted against this. Germany? Bam! Germany. Germany voted against the UN resolution to condemn Nazism. France, victim of many war crimes by the Nazis, they voted against condemning Nazism. Did Nazism as an ideology really die during World War II? Absolutely not. But meanwhile, look all the countries that they want you to hate. Every single country they want you to hate believe that Nazism is bad. Russia believes Nazism is bad. China believes Nazism is bad. The UK doesn't. How is there now a more clear example of who are the good guys and who's the bad guys? Cuba is against Nazism. Meanwhile, people like Zoran Mamdani want you to believe that Venezuela and Cuba are the evil authoritarian states as they stand for anti-imperialism. So this is why I'm deeply uncomfortable with the United States left. Because all the people who organize with Democrats, all the progressive Democrats, why is there no disgust in you that the Democratic Party is 100% in bed with this international NATO pro-Nazi agenda? I was looking at some of the other countries that voted against it. Look at based ass Yemen. Russia is based. Like, bro, if you look at this list, bro, it's all the African countries voting against it. African countries, everyone in the global south, everyone that they tell us is authoritarian, but every single European country is voting for this. The United Kingdom, United States, Canada. So I was just skimming over the list again. Look at Denmark. Denmark. The social democrat Zoran Mamdani DSA Holy Land. We need to have a country like Denmark that enables imperialism and genocide. Belgium, oh my God. Bro, all the social democratic countries are cooked, bro. This is the devil's bargain that they want to make. Hey, man, if we support your imperialism, can we get a piece of the spoils? Can I have some Medicare for all with your blood money? Jesus Christ. Now you guys understand why my politics is generally United States bad, West is bad. People like liberal-minded people see my political presence, and that's why I'm not invited on our shows. They're like, man, this nigga just anti-West. People like, nigga just anti-West, man. You just always rooting against the United States. Sir and ma'am, of course I am going to root against the political alliance that is aligned with Nazism. You goddamn right I want Vladimir Putin to denazify Ukraine. You goddamn right I'm standing with my communist brothers and sisters in China against these pro-Nazi scourge. Sickening. Japan? Look at Japan! Oh, Jesus Christ! Bro, I've been going viral as hell on Japan roasting Sane Takaichi because you guys know I'm a geopolitical nerd, and Japan is complete. Japan, I was looking around, that's like the only non-European country. So essentially it's the Europeans and their vassal state. Oh, look, Israel voted in favor of it. So they were like, all right, Israel, you can't. Look, I'm actually shocked by that. Look, Israel voted in favor of it. But I guess that makes sense because they want to sell the narrative that they're against the Nazis. But look, man, look at hey, Israel, look. All the people who support you support Nazism. And Israel, just because you voted in favor to condemn Nazism doesn't hide the fact that you guys will make the Nazis blush. So Israel engaged in some gamemanship there. Look, Iraq, India voted. Israel is the only shocking one, but we all know why they did it. Like, it'll be just politically stupid if Israel don't pretend to be against Nazism, which is why it's shocking that so many Western countries are unapologetically voting against condemning Nazism. Even Israel understands that, like, yeah, we also Nazi ass shit. Yeah, we all for Nazi ideology, but we can't be seen. We can't be seen being soft on them. But remember, when we look at the new axis of evil, when we talk about the United States, Israel, Ukraine, these are the countries who voted against food as a human right. Let me see if I can find that receipt. Food, human right, UN, Israel. I want to see. Only U.S. and Israel voted against UN move to make food as a human right. Meanwhile, liberals still believe that geopolitics is complicated. Like, man, you got to admit that America is a force for good in the world. That's what Ro Khanna told me. Like, Whenever I talk to progressives, they sound like fucking Dick Cheney. Like I can turn the average Nina Turner, Ro Khanna progressive. I can make them sound like Dick Cheney in one conversation. My ideology is so based. I love because I turn liberals into fucking neocon sounding Republicans, and I turn the Dave Smith, Ben Shapiro Republicans. They sound like whiny shit libs when I talk to them. Isn't that interesting? That was my ideology due to duopoly brains. I make conservatives sound like shit libs, and I make shit libs sound like Dick Cheney. Remember, Ro Khanna isn't supportive. He's like, I support the spirit of liberation. That's why I support the Nazis in Ukraine. I was like, hey man, bro, do you support Hamas and Palestinian resistance? No. Fam, give me 5 minutes with someone like Zoran Mamdani and see how fast I will dress them down and expose them as the neocons they are. Calling Cuba and Venezuela authoritarian states. Come on, man. They don't say anything about the UK, Germany, all these countries who voted for this Nazi resolution. These countries that are full-blown fascists. Like, you have doctors in the UK being arrested for calling out UK complicity in genocide. Where's the DSA left on that? Where's the Social Democrat left? They're like, oh, we got to stand against authoritarianism. You never hear them lay a glove on the UK or Germany when it comes to their fascism. I bet you every single TYT majority report, all these orbiter channels who support Ukraine, remember Sam Cedar was still in denial about Nazis in Ukraine. I bet you not a single one of them cover this. They never do. They never cover Zelensky giving national honor to Nazis with their Nazi instinct. Well, I just reported in my hotspot. You will never see them report on that. You will never see the report on the entire generation of Ukrainian men that was wiped out. The 100,000 Ukrainian men that was fleeing the country over the last few years because NATO is sending them to a meat grinder. Where is the progressive left criticism of this? No, but what I've seen over the last 4 or 5 years was them in support of Nazis. And then they got Cory Bush running again. Oh, Cory Bush fighting against AIPAC. Cory Bush voting to send tens of billions of dollars that should have went to the hood in St. Louis. She sent it to Nazis in Ukraine. And then the only interview when she was asked on System Update about it, the only interview where she was asked about Ukraine, she said, well, I voted for it because the Biden administration told me we had no choice. That's your progressive fighter? They like, Nick, you supporting Cory Bush? Hell no. There is no way you will catch me dead, ever, organizing or supporting anyone who supported this Ukraine proxy war, which the entirety of the NATO left. The entirety of the NATO left. The Hassan Piker left. When the majority, they all in for the conspiracy theory that, oh, there's no Nazis in Ukraine. And they have no criticism of how the EU leaders, and we have our guest join us. Hey, Tim, I'm going to introduce you here very soon. We have Tim Anderson, amazing writer, geopolitical analyst, who will be joining us after this segment. Here's Friedrich Merz, the BlackRock prime minister. So European democracy is so cooked, they got rid of the middleman. Like, we understand that usually the puppets in the suit, like Barack Obama, the Bill Clintons, these smiley politicians, we understand that they're puppets of the capitalist class. You're supposed to have a stand-in to represent your interests. That's how it used to work. Now it's so corrupt that they don't even bother with that middleman shit anymore in Europe. In Europe, they're like, man, we're just going to pull someone directly from BlackRock and we're going to have them be prime minister. The same thing they did in France. That's how advanced capitalist dictatorship is in the West. They got rid of the middleman. So this is in German, but here's Friedrich Merz, who's urging young men in Ukraine to serve their country. So there's many Ukrainian men who fled the country. Many Ukrainian men are refusing to join the military. They realizing they were being sent to a meat grinder. And as this is happening, you have Western leaders that are trying to push Ukraine to lower the conscription age, while European leaders are threatening to deport any men. Like, I was about to say military age, but honestly, anywhere 20 through 50, there's like grandpas on the battlefield in Ukraine. That's how much the current generation of Ukrainian men was wiped out by this NATO proxy war. And this he says instead of fleeing, we need you to die for NATO. We know we have no chance to win this war, but we need you to die for NATO for us. We can't have you guys flee.
Nach Deutschland kommen, sondern dass sie den Dienst in ihrem Land versehen. Da werden sie gebraucht und in Deutschland werden die Transferleistungen.
This is why I never had Trump derangement syndrome. When you realize that every single member of the ruling class across the entirety of the Nazi supporting NATO West, they all crazy just like Donald Trump. Friedrich Merz, how is he different than Donald Trump? He's not. He's literally a business tycoon, BlackRock executive that is advocating for cutting social spending to advance and spend more on the military, while he demands more Ukrainians die for him. All right, let me get my last receipt, and we gotta get Tim in here. I'm also going to cover the next step, and we'll get into the color revolution in Mexico. I'm gonna ask Tim. I would love to get Tim's thoughts on Trump's aggressive actions in Venezuela. Also, maybe we might get into some Syria talk, because Tim Anderson, he does great reporting all over geopolitics. So Tim, I'll bring you in 1 second here. But I will show you guys Viktor Orban, who is despised by the Western left. You would see Bernie Sanders call out Viktor Orban, but you would never hear Bernie Sanders call out Friedrich Merz. During his rally for the oligarchy tour, he fundraising for the Democratic Party, talking about fighting the oligarchy. Get the fuck out of here. But anyway, during his fighting for the oligarchy tour, Bernie Sanders, in his speeches, I heard it all the time, he will always bring up Viktor Orban. He can't stand Viktor Orban. And I'm not ideologically aligned with Viktor Orban, but Viktor Orban is critical of NATO. So Bernie Sanders called out the politician who is critical of NATO, but you would never hear him lay a glove on Friedrich Merz. When has Bernie Sanders called out the UK for arresting over 30 people per day based on what they post on social media? I repeat, do you realize the UK is leading the world in online censorship? Where's the left criticism of this stuff? Nowhere to be found. But Bernie Sanders, he tell you every single chance he gets, like, Donald Trump is turning us into a Viktor Orban level authoritarian state. But this is Viktor Orban, who is an Israeli puppet. I'm not a fan of Viktor Orban, but he's been critical of the NATO proxy war. And this is him explaining how Ursula von der Leyen and the NATO thugs are essentially putting massive pressure on him and every single European to abandon their own people in order to fund NATO even more. Implementing austerity for their community to fund the NATO war machine. But if you look at the United States left, if you look at the Green parties all over Europe, zero criticism of any of this stuff. All right, I think I can end it here. I should read a tweet. I received a letter today from Ursula von der Leyen. She writes that Ukraine's financial gap is significant. Maybe they should negotiate then. They losing people. You guys are demanding Ukrainians come back. Their financial situation is dire. So instead of advocating negotiation, they are putting pressure on allies to bankrupt their country on behalf of their proxy war for Russia. How long can they maintain this? How is it even sustainable? It's astonishing at a time when it has become clear that a war mafia is siphoning off European taxpayer money instead of demanding real oversight. This is what I was talking about. I was talking about the corruption scandal. So Viktor Orban was like, hey man, we just seen how the Ukrainian officials are stealing millions of dollars in resources. You have the Ukrainian government that can't pass an audit. They are one of the most corrupt countries. Meanwhile, European leaders are demanding that we send resources to that country. This is essentially what Viktor Orban was saying. People think, I won't bring my guests in. I think I ran enough on this. We have an amazing writer, geopolitical analyst join us. Thank you. We have Tim Anderson who joined us. We're going to break down a ton of geopolitics headline. I follow you on X for a while. I'm glad that we finally able to have a conversation. Thank you for joining me on RBN. Once again, Tim Anderson.
Welcome, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. In my first segment, I have a lot of things I want to ask you because you do great coverage on multiple topics in geopolitics. This is what I was ranting about. I don't know if you had a chance to see this, but there was a UN resolution, and we see this consistently, like with food as a human right, and now we have the collective West voting against this resolution to condemn Nazism. Like if you look at this list, it's UK, Germany, France, US, essentially NATO and their proxies. Like I saw Japan is on there as well. So before we get started, some other stories, we'll cover Venezuela, Syria, a few other topics as well. But before I get started, I want your thoughts on this UN resolution that I will just break it down. Thank you for joining us once again, Tim Anderson.
Welcome. Yeah. Well, the Russian motion is put every year, and of course the NATO neo-fascists are miffed because it's Russia doing it, basically, and because they've always employed fascists. They at the end of the Second World War, a very large number of Nazis were employed in different respects to help with the US in civil and military operations. To this day, we see, I think, as you pointed out in Ukraine, there are open Nazis, neo-Nazis there. They even, I think, the last time Zelensky was seen near the front line, they had swastikas behind him when he was handing out medals to the Azov Brigade. So the relationship between NATO and Nazis, neo-Nazis, is a very long one, very deep one.
Yeah, and that's why I've been aggressively calling this out, because we've seen the United States and the West just unapologetically aligning with Nazis, the same way they're aligning with the head choppers in Syria. And you've been calling. I want your thoughts on this, because you have the West who had a bounty on, I still call him Jelani. I don't give a fuck. Jelani, Syria, and now you see him meeting with Donald Trump in the White House. You've been doing a lot of reporting on this and how the West is essentially carving Syria up. So, Tim, I want to get your thoughts on the United States' new relationship with Syria and how did it fit in their plan to achieve their Greater Israel project. What are your thoughts on Syria all of a sudden? Like you had Jelani, for example, begging for friendly relationships with Israel despite them seizing Syria water supplies and Syria lands. You have done a lot of report on this. I want to get your thoughts on this new United States-Syrian relationship before we continue.
Well, it's really brought things out in the open that we've been talking about for a very long time. There was a very long, dirty war against Syria. It was also a type of color revolution, which I think, to be open about it, fooled a lot of the Western anti-war people, the Western internationalists. Really, they fell for this color revolution, as a lot of them did in Libya, basically. But it was a process where the US and there was a CIA operation called Timber Sycamore, and you've got some very prominent liberals like Jeffrey Sachs talking about it now, talking openly about it. He didn't talk so much about it when it was happening, but after the damage is done, we find a lot of people coming out of the woodwork and admitting that a lot of people who weren't really campaigning against the war when it was happening. But the US effectively had always employed these extremists to try and destabilize and divide first Libya, then Syria, then also they tried it in Lebanon and, of course, in Iraq. I think the first things that were really written about it in the corporate media in the US was Seymour Hersh talking about George W. Bush. And what was it? The article was called The Redirection, I think. The Redirection. And it was about the plan of the US and the Pentagon to use Salafism, to use sectarian Salafism that comes out of the Persian Gulf monarchies, basically, Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia. That sectarian type of Islam, which first of all paints a very bad picture of Islam. It's like, like using the KKK to talk about Christians, basically. But that's what they used to try and prevent a normal neighborly relationship developing between Iran, which they hate because of the support Iran gives for Palestine, basically, and the new regime that they'd helped install in Iraq, having got rid of Saddam Hussein. And it was going to be natural. I mean, the Shia Muslims hated Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and he was a bad man in many respects. But nevertheless, of course, once the invasion happened and the people saw what the US was doing in place of Saddam, they weren't as happy as some of them were to start with. But the US was very worried that there was going to be new, normal, good neighborly relations between Iran and Iraq. And so they set about empowering this Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which later became the Islamic State in Iraq and later became the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, or is the Islamic State in the Iraq and Syria. The Western media, after a while, began to call it the Islamic State. There wasn't ever really a state run by them, basically. But, there were many, many leaks in early days of US officials talking about how this was a very desirable thing because it was going to undermine Damascus. And that's what they wanted to do. They saw Syria as the weak link in the chain of peoples and states who were supporting the Palestinian people. And Syria played a very important role there, although it was reluctant to get directly involved in a shooting match with the Israelis. Nevertheless, they held the Israelis off from the border. They controlled their airspace. They did shoot down one Israeli plane back in about 2017 or 2018, I think. And more importantly, they provided weapons, a conduit of weapons to the resistance in Lebanon and to the Palestinians. And when Jolani did his job, basically his main task was to destroy that independent, rather pluralist regime led by Assad. Of course, it wasn't just Jolani, because really why the Syrian army collapsed was that Qatar was the main financier of Jolani and those gangs, bought off a majority of the senior commanders in the Syrian army. And the rest of them, the loyal and those traitors really are still in Syria working with Jolani to identify who was fighting them back in that period between 2011 and 2024. The loyal ones were evacuated to Russia by the Russians, basically, and many of them are sitting in Moscow now under this condition. Seems to be the Russian condition, I'm just inferring it, that they give them asylum there as long as they don't talk about it. They don't want Russia to be used as a platform for political campaigning, because as you know, Russia is now trying to make the best of a bad thing and develop relations with the Syrian people through the new regime, which they were not too long ago bombing. But I think the conclusion they came to, and the conclusion that Iran came to also, was that if the Syrian army isn't going to fight these gangs, well-armed and well-funded gangs, then we can't help them. We can help them, but we can't take the place of the Syrian army. And that was the problem. There were probably many soldiers prepared to keep fighting. There were many, many tens of thousands of Syrian soldiers who died to prevent happening what actually did happen with the Al-Qaeda takeover of Damascus. But nevertheless, once the command was corrupted and bought, that was the fatal blow, effectively, to an independent Syria, because they believed in an independent Syria. They believed in a pluralist Syria where everyone was considered equally, and they tried to overcome this sectarianism, which is really successfully exploited in many respects by the NATO, by the US and its NATO hangers-on, basically, and by the Arab monarchies of the Persian Gulf. And by the Israelis, of course, but the Israelis tried to keep an arm's length. They did admit funding and of course treating in hospital some of the injured fighters. But a lot of that was covered up for a long time until Trump's first campaign. Now, the interesting thing is Trump, back in 2016, you remember his first campaign, he started to talk about Obama and Hillary Clinton creating ISIS. And he was right, effectively. He was correct, or went back earlier than that. It went back to George W. Bush. But, of course, when he got into power the first time in 2017, I remember it very well, the corporate media really, or we could say the deep state, which includes some of those media oligopolies, began to troll him. And they had an opportunity in early 2017 where there was another fake chemical weapons attack, or rather a chemical weapons attack that was carried out by the Al-Qaeda groups in a part of southern Idlib. And they falsely blamed it on the Syrian army, and then Trump was persuaded to go and attack Syria. And so Trump became captured by the deep state again, despite what he was saying in 2016. But it was interesting because it allowed a certain period of time where parts of the media, parts of the corporate media around the world were starting to question this and allow a bit of discussion about what was really going on with the Al-Qaeda in Syria, and was the US really supporting it. And but when Trump towed the line effectively and started to bomb Syria again, things went back to as normal until 2024, December 2024, and then now people really talk about it more openly, as they did about Libya after they'd murdered Gaddafi, after they'd destroyed what was really one of the most effective African states, highest standard of living, highest status of women. There were a lot of very good things to be said about Libya, basically. But once the damage was done, they admitted all sorts of things. They admitted that a lot of the allegations about Gaddafi were false, the use of black mercenaries, the army raping women, and so on. I think the head of Amnesty International in France apologised about all of these sorts of things, and then went back to pretending to be the saviour of the people in Libya. So sometimes they don't mind admitting these sorts of things after the damage is done, after they've got what they want. And I think with Syria, there's a fair bit of that too. That really they're a little bit indifferent to. Well, of course, you've seen Jelani in the White House or in Washington with Trump, and Trump actually, iconically spraying some perfume on him, in this process of whitewashing as you rightly call them, the head choppers in Syria that were a terrible scourge, and all of the branches of them were hated by the Syrian people. And now, unfortunately, those people are occupied by them, and most of the people there are very intimidated. They're putting their heads down. They're trying to survive. They have a new regime, which is far worse than the previous one. And Jelani's trying to escape the unilateral coercive measures, the US sanctions, to try and improve the economy. It hasn't really worked yet. There's still very dire conditions there, and a lot of random violence going on by gangs, including foreign fighters who were invited in by Jelani's gangs. And really, it's a lot of chaotic violence, which the Jelani regime can never resolve effectively. You've seen huge massacres on the coast, serious massacres in the south, in Sweda. It's going on every day. I can't even repost the amount of things I'm seeing. Every day there are kidnappings of women, random killings particularly of minorities, but anyone who worked with the government, including the Palestinians, Jihad Islamiyah, the Palestinian faction, their leaders were tortured and jailed for a while. But they're intimidated to speak out now too, because of course they had good relationships with Assad, they had good relationships with the Syrian army, because the policy of the Assad government was the same as Iran. We will support all of the Palestinian factions, and they can work out what their future government's going to be, but we'll support all of them. And that was really, therefore, they had good relations, therefore they're subject to persecution in the new free Syria.
Fantastic breakdown, and there's still a bit I gotta cover. I'm gonna end the RBN stream on YouTube. Make sure you guys check us out on the other platforms we're streaming on as well. You should be redirected to my personal live stream. So I'm ending the RBN stream now. I want to get your thoughts, because that was a great breakdown on the situation in Syria. What baffled me, and I was accused of left infighting for this, because it drove me crazy when I saw the Free Palestine people who supported the downfall in Syria. Can you explain to me the Mediathon style people, and this is like a large amount of what I see in the professional managerial class Arab community. Like the same way we have black sellouts, like we have black neocons. We've seen Eric Adams bowing at the wall. There's a gigantic problem, and I have bonding sessions with my fellow Palestinian brothers and sisters about how we struggle with sellout black leaders. They struggle with sellout Arab leaders and Arab propagandists. And Medinson is like one of the most prominent examples. But there's so many of these people in the Free Palestine movement who actively confuse people about this issue. And it was clear to me that the fall of Syria was a gigantic boom for the United States. I'll just read a few headlines. I want to get your thoughts on this line of thinking here. And look, this is an article that you shared. Post-Assad Syria, rebuilt for United States power, not its people. So why would anyone who's part of the Free Palestine movement trust this guy who was making promises to Donald Trump in the United States that they wanted to seek normalization with the state of Israel while Assad was supporting the resistance? So do you have any explanations at all for why there was so much confusion on this issue? Because I feel like people was gaslighting me. They were like, you were just an American. You don't know about Syria. But anyway, Tim, you have any thoughts on this before we move on?
Oh, sure. No, it's something we've based. We formed a group called Hands Off Syria in Australia back in 2012. And very few people in the anti-war movement joined us. Most of the left liberals and the Trotskyists were on the back of this colour revolution, just as they were in the so-called revolution against Gaddafi in Libya. And I might add, the same people would also badmouth Hezbollah in Lebanon, claiming because they were religious inspired, therefore they were sectarian, which isn't the same thing at all. And of course, Iran too, for the same sort of reasons, that, this is a terrible religious regime. They didn't understand really the role of the regional resistance, which is absolutely critical to support of Palestine. And this is the sad thing, as you've partly referred to, basically, that a lot of people to this day, who still support Palestine, and they do genuinely support Palestine, they don't understand the role of resistance. They don't understand the Palestinian resistance groups. They don't understand the role of the regional resistance. There's something called an axis of resistance, or a resistance front in the region, which has been in process for quite a long time, which is extremely important. If it didn't exist, the Palestinian people may not exist today. But I think that the susceptibility of Western people to jump on these colour revolutions, I mean, they were doing it with Eastern Europe before, type of imperial culture, I call it the saviour complex. You might want to call it a white saviour complex, but the imperial saviour complex, they want to save people, so if there's some discussion about a brutal dictator who's oppressing his own people and so on, as in the case of Gaddafi or Assad or so on, they're very susceptible to that, and they want to join in something that's going to tear something down, because there's sort of an anarchistic or anarcho-syndicalistic element in part of the Western left, which says, yes, tear it all down, because none of these states amount to anything. Even though in their own countries they will sort of come and say, oh, we support public health and public education, but they want to tear a system down in another state which might have provided those sorts of things to people. And indeed, Gaddafi's Libya did that. And if you look at the level of education in Iran today, you'd see the same sort of thing. There's been tremendous advances in Iran. But anyway, these sort of things are passed by. And I think the saviour complex people, of course, aided by, the US propaganda machine, and in the Middle East, aided by the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood's another thing that's important to understand. It's a type of Islamism that's related to Salafism. It's very sectarian, but it's also been a strong collaborator with the big powers, collaborated with the British in Egypt back in the 1940s, and then handed over to the US in the 1950s, as the Saudis were effectively. So they have been behind the violent uprisings against Gaddafi and against Assad, or prior to Assad, back in the 1980s, effectively they were working with the imperial powers. The Muslim Brotherhood is basically a group of Muslim businessmen, a secret society of Muslim businessmen, that they've been involved in assassinations and massacres and so on to try and enhance political power, their own political power, at first in Egypt and then in Syria, for example. and then actually in Afghanistan, you've got something different, but ideologically similar, called Deobandis. Deobandism is like Salafism for South Asia, although apparently they don't like each other, because often you get this, that the sectarians hate each other and will fight each other too. And that's what we see, for example, back in 2017, when the Saudis moved against Qatar. They tried to move against Qatar because they were very jealous of Qatar's influence. Qatar's only a small place, super rich from oil, of course, but they also have Al Jazeera, which has been a very successful media operation. And the thing about Al Jazeera that people don't really understand, and including many people in the Arab world, didn't see it until these colour revolutions came around. Al Jazeera has been allowed to be quite progressive as regards Palestine, but everything else is rubbish. Everything else, they will follow a US line. Let's look at the reality in Qatar. Qatar hosts the biggest US military base in the whole region, if you exclude Israel. The biggest air base and military base is in Qatar, so they are deeply in bed with the US military. CENTCOM, you know, the Pentagon's branch to supposedly rule over the whole of West Asia and part of North Africa, is based in Qatar. The head of CENTCOM, based in Qatar, goes to Israel every week or so to help, guide the operations. They're co-commanding the operations in Gaza, for example. So they're directly responsible for what's going on in Gaza there. So Al Jazeera has been this very important asset for the US in promoting these colour revolutions. So you find people like Mehdi Hassan, others who have worked in Al Jazeera, some defectors from Syria, for example, Faisal al-Qassem from Sweden. He himself is a minority from the Cruse community in Sweden. He was on Al Jazeera urging the genocide of the Alawi minority, because the Alawi minority are associated with the army, or were associated with the army in Syria. So you've had these people promoting these colour revolutions through Al Jazeera, and it's influential because they're ex-BBC people and so on. They have much more credibility than Al Arabiya, the main one in Saudi Arabia, for example. And the Saudis are jealous of that. So that at times the Salafi Wahhabis, terrorists from Saudi Arabia, have collaborated with Muslim Brotherhood groups in Syria, for example, and at times there's been some jealous infighting, basically. And you could say the same about Yemen too, because Yemen is an extension of this too. The Ansarullah revolution of more than 10 years ago, which is not recognized by any state in the world except the Islamic Republic of Iran, by the way. Briefly, Assad in Syria recognized them, and then he pulled back because he was trying to appease the Saudis and the Emiratis back there. But Yemen is a very important player, and I visited there in February this year. And I think a lot of people are really curious as to how they came out of a war that they were fighting for their survival against this coalition of the British and the US and the Saudis and so on. And all of a sudden, they're the only state in the region firing hypersonic missiles at the Israelis in support of Gaza, basically. So how did they do this? How did this have this sort of determination? It's an extraordinary story, and I'm co-editing a book with some Yemeni friends over this at the moment. But they faced a similar sort of things. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, for example, the same sort of thing, funded by the Saudis, and also the Emiratis are there. The Emiratis are there working with the Israelis, occupying still substantial parts, minority, but substantial parts of Yemen, occupying Socotra Island, which is a World Heritage area. They're running tours, they're advertising tours on Instagram to take tourists to Yemen, Socotra Island, but it's occupied Socotra Island. So the same sort of forces have been used there. And I might add, if we go across to North Africa and you look at the groups like Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram, it's the same sort of thing. It's the same sort of sectarian Salafism being used to weaken and divide those states, particularly the Sahel states and Nigeria. And then now we've got this other group, the RSF, as everyone knows, supported by the UAE in Sudan. Sudan already having been divided, now being further attacked and brutalized to weaken and divide them. This is the tactic that was used across West Asia. It's being used, encouraged, I suppose, by their relative success in Libya and Syria against a lot of North Africa, basically. And because we have this megalomaniac regime in Washington which wants to dominate the world, it wants to be the dictator of the world, and this is their tried and proven tactic, to divide and weaken communities with self-manufactured terrorist groups then present themselves as the saviors or the liberators to come in and protect them. They did it in Iraq, remember, when Obama actually withdrew troops in 2011 after some pressure. But then when Iraq was weak and too weak to defend itself against Daesh to start with, they invited the US, unwisely invited the US back in to help them fight Daesh, ISIS. Really, now you would hear from Iraqi commanders that they never fought ISIS at all. They were an obstacle to fighting ISIS, and it was the mobilized volunteers in Iraq, Hashd al-Shabi, the popular mobilization units, that actually did defeat ISIS and protected Christian communities too, for example. I mean, the expulsion of Christian communities from Iraq, from Syria, from Palestine has been a joint operation by the US and by the Israelis, effectively. But you won't find many people in the West talking about that. They want to blame it on Muslims because, conscripted to the support of the US effort to dominate the entire region with their proxies in their lieutenants in Israel and Saudi Arabia, was the use of this extreme sectarian Islam, which also damaged the image of Islam in the world, really. But they're doing the same thing in North Africa. So I warn people looking at what's going on in North Africa, don't worry too much about who's behind it. It's the same people who were behind it in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and in Lebanon, and in Yemen. Yeah. But in Yemen, we had the one real revolution from the Arab Spring. The only genuine revolution was in Yemen. And hardly anyone is recognizing that now. But all the fake revolutions, they ran in to support, the Cedar Revolution in Lebanon and the Syrian Revolution, which was a Muslim Brotherhood revolution, and whatever it was in Libya that drove Libya into absolute chaos, whatever they want to call that one.
Yeah, fantastic.
Everything except the real revolution.
Yeah, I love how you tie all these things together, man. That was a fantastic breakdown.
Well, it's a single war. It's a single war.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what I was saying earlier. I don't know how much you call it my initial monologue. It's the West that endorses Nazism, and they are in rebellion against the concept of international law. They're gangsters, and you have the global majority that is fighting against it. That's why you mentioned Yemen. I'm glad you did, because I don't think enough Americans talk about how Trump took a giant L to Yemen. Like, you guys know that Trump fought a war against Yemen and lost earlier this year, right? Like, the fighters in Yemen are unbelievably brave, and they should have our support. And the people who don't understand this, like this analysis that you bring is so useful. And this is what I try to stress to my audience, is that the battle lines have been drawn in the imperialists versus the people who resist imperialism. How you have the global majority who is resisting our current status quo, our current system of imperialism, which ties NATO, which ties our Zionist state together, which is why, if you're not understanding of this struggle, which is clear as day once you have the knowledge that Tim Anderson had, that is what leads to people being confused. And you see these people with Ukraine flags and Palestine flags. Like, those are the sign of people who have no idea about the current state of geopolitics, the people who try to tie the Ukraine, Palestine issues, and many others just like that. But before I move on, I want to get your thoughts on this, because I have my main story. Another main story I want to cover today with the Mexican color revolution. So we'll be covering that here very soon. If you're in the chat, let me know how his mic's sounding. I just got this new mic today. I appreciate anyone who helped with the fundraising efforts. Let me know in the chat. I'm like live testing this new mic as we speak right now. And I saw, and Zoya reminded me that you're currently in Brazil covering the climate summit. So I want to get your thoughts on what you've seen on the ground. And I found a few interesting things. You have all these people marching, calling for action on climate change. We've seen so many people displaced. We've seen water systems being poisoned. And many Americans don't understand, like, the impacts that this had on the global working class. Like, for example, like, just one example, there are fishing industries in Southeast Asia that have been completely decimated because the amount of acidification in the ocean, the amount of pollution in the ocean. That is one example of how climate change is affecting people all around the world. And that's why we had the climate summit, where the United States under the Trump regime, they like, man, we don't want to do anything with the climate summits and protecting the environment, which is deeply contradictory to me, because if you're a religious person, like if you're a Christian, don't you know that the earth was given to you by God? Like what is a more important thing to do with your government than to take care of this planet that was gifted to you by God? And I'm not even religious, but I remember being religious. Like, that's how I used to think about it, right? But evangelical Christians, you would think they're the number one people who don't care at all about taking care of this gift by God that was given us. So anyway, that's the point I'm making about the United States. They're backing out these climate initiatives, while China, which is another example of the United States being geopolitically short-sighted, where China is stepping to a larger role into the climate summits, which shows the rise of China's influence. This, like the relationship between China and Brazil, is why China dominated Trump in the trade war. Because China was like, hey man, we're gonna buy some soybeans from Brazil. And you guys see how China stepping in a leading role on these things is actually hurtful for the Western propagandists as a whole. But Tim, this is a few things I found shortly covering this climate summit. Do you have any thoughts about what world leaders are discussing? What have you seen on the ground covering the climate summit? Any thoughts on this before we move on, Tim?
Well, look, the blue zone in the COP summit here in northern Brazil is really where all the official things are going on. But frankly, it's a big front. It's a big scam, mostly what's going on, because after all these years of these sorts of talks, the governments and the big companies are in there trying to demonstrate to people how wonderful they are, and the level of greenwashing is just astonishing. The group I came with, though, is a group that wanted to draw attention to Gaza, basically. We wanted to say, you can't talk about protecting this planet, you know, and saving the earth and saving the natural world, and carry out not just a genocide, but an ecocide in Palestine, you know, murdering tens of thousands of people, dropping 200,000 tons of bombs, you know, damaging the soil, destroying. They got rid of 2.5 million trees in Gaza. They got rid of 50,000 trees on the West Bank. They destroyed all the agriculture in Gaza. You can't murder people and destroy the entire living world in there, and then come and say you're prepared to, you're a good corporate citizen or a good global citizen. You're going to reduce your greenhouse gases. The Israelis have presented reports to this UN body for quite some time. They don't even admit that the Palestinian people exist, let alone talk about apartheid and genocide. None of that there. Nothing about for example, the carbon emissions from the Israeli military in the last 2 years, which are more than 30 countries, 30 smaller countries, basically. So they don't mention that at all. They, in fact, of course, they have all these mechanisms you've probably heard of. I mean, they've got them in Brazil too, and they've got them in my country, in Australia too, but that's usually the example of the Israelis. They will destroy a Palestinian village. They will raze it to the ground. They will bulldoze earth in and plant European pine trees there. And then they can claim carbon credits, because it's true that newly growing plants absorb more carbon than older plants, perhaps like olive trees. They're still destroying olive trees all across the West Bank, because they want to destroy the relationship that the indigenous people there have with agriculture and with their culture and their way of survival. So we've been, for several days here, we've had panels of people talking about this, and we've had a number of people, including your colleague, I believe, Ajamu Baraka, who the other day was just saying, I think yesterday was saying, listen, the same people that are talking about saving the climate, saving the world, are the ones that are destroying Gaza at the moment. They're the same people. It's a global imperialist system led by the US, which is doing the greatest damage to the climate, pretending to be the saviors and carrying out these atrocities in Gaza and trying to hide it in different ways, basically. So we were trying to draw, all of the people attending our stalls in the green zone were basically Brazilian people, largely young Brazilian people, and largely young Brazilian women, I have to say, because they have a lot of genuine interest in protecting the planet, and a lot of interest in Palestine too. A lot of them are very well educated about that. So we had a number of very good sessions trying to make that link. The ecocide in Gaza is something that has to be on the agenda of any type of ecological international discussion. You can't let people get away with coming along to a session like that and saying nothing about it, covering it up and pretending they're good global citizens. So that was what was going on at COP here, basically. Of course, the whole COP process has become rather autistic because they are really focused on this idea of having numbers for carbon credits and carbon offsets and so on, which is really a very poor way of looking at the natural environment. Because, as I said, you can destroy the natural environment, you can push people off their land, small farmers and indigenous people off their land here in the Amazon. You can plant monocultures there and then claim that you've improved the ecology. So there's a lot of nonsense and autistic partitioning of the environment going on here. I think new bubble economies will be created out of concern to look good in these sorts of things, and you see a lot of big companies and countries trying to look good there. But we were trying to draw attention to Gaza, and I think it was quite successful. There was a march 2 days ago, and it was reported around the world. It was reported particularly in the Israeli media that there were huge Palestinian flags being carried at that march, that climate change march, carried by Brazilian people here up in North Brazil. In Mexico, it's a different sort of thing, but you're quite right. It looks like a color revolution. I just heard today, actually, some of the characters who are involved in that were the extreme right wing in Mexico. It's no secret. Yeah, Vicente Fox, the former president, who was a friend of George W. Bush. Whereas Claudia Sheinbaum, the current president, there isn't a popular uprising against her. Really, she's very popular, like her mentor before her, AMLO. Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, very popular. She's been very well received by the population there. There's no popular uprising against her, but of course they will manufacture these things, and this is what's happening today. I think I saw a North American commentator saying the other day that a couple of commentators actually, that what's coming through the corporate media these days is so consistently mendacious. They are lying constantly. It's that crazy. We are destined for war, basically.
I watch a lot of propaganda. I feel like a lot of people don't realize how bad it's gotten, because you would see the liberal corporate media meeting the CI talking about Mexico. Please continue, Tim.
I think Paul Craig Roberts was saying we're destined to war because the lies will be there to hide the facts, and then the facts will be buried until they can find the new fake story to be the official story, basically. And then I saw, that was Paul Craig Roberts. And then I saw Julian Assange from Australia saying, look, when you see the level of lying that's going on in the corporate media and the state media these days, the question arises, we're better off without all of them. We're better off without any of them. I mean, I haven't watched any television since the invasion of Iraq. That's my attitude to it. Other people say, I want to know what other people are talking about. But no, I think people should read Mein Kampf too, but not every day. Basically, I think some of these things you can look at now and then, but you don't really, it poisons your mind. It's worse than going to McDonald's and having your body poisoned, is having this stuff in your head every day. Really, the junk propaganda is poisonous stuff, and I think we've got to find some ways to wean people off it. It's a terrible, bad habit. It's worse than junk food.
That's a fantastic way to put it. I want to go back quickly to where you mentioned the climate summit. Our last segment of the night will be the Mexico color revolution. I'm gonna show people who haven't been following a few receipts, and I'm glad you've been following us. I would love to get your thoughts on the few things I'm gonna break down. But regarding your take on the climate summit, I love that you explained how there are these capitalist scum who try and take advantage. They greenwash themselves, and they're gonna pretend they care about the environment, and they never touch the military-industrial complex, which is the largest polluter in human history. You guys know the largest polluter in human history is the United States military over the last few decades. So if you're one of these climate activists and you don't ever bring up the military-industrial complex, you're not an environmentalist. You're a gardener. Like, you plant trees and shit. Like, you're essentially a glorified gardener if you're talking about the environment without bringing up the sins of the military-industrial complex, which I think is why it's so important. I'm glad that you guys there bring that up, because as the ruling class wants everyone else to make these sacrifices, like the top 1% is responsible for the vast majority, the overwhelming, 90% of all carbon emissions. Like a flight on a private jet alone, when these billionaires will emit way more carbon dioxide than you will do in your entire life driving, for example. So I always try to stress to people that climate action is about class war. Without a class war element to the climate problem, we will never reach a solution. There's no capitalist solution to it. We have to take on the ruling class, which is the number one driver of this issue. But I want to get to the Mexican color revolution. I'm glad you brought it up. I'm glad you've been following this. This will be our last story of the day. I've been following Claudia Sheinbaum for quite a bit. And do you understand how, like, just the audacity, the audacity of the West to try to stage a color revolution with a leader who has an approval rating that floats at any given time around 75 to 80%? Like, so
Yeah,
for one,
that's right.
you know it's a color revolution when they try to overthrow a government that has popular support. And another way you can tell, and feel free to chime in with your expertise as well. One of the number one ways you can tell whether something is a color revolution is when you have a protest that is randomly violent. Like, it's not self-defense. It's a protest that is randomly violent, and it's a protest with zero demands. You guys see those two things? Those two things are the number one tells. One, there's no demands, and secondly, they start fucking shit up for no reason. These are the number one signs of Western option. This is exactly what we see in Mexico. Yeah, these Mexican protesters that look, you see how they charging and trying to break down the barricades? This is textbook CIA revolution nonsense. Whenever you just see random violence, and here are just some of the things. Here's another one. Look, it's getting worse in Mexico. The rioters are now fighting the police. Fighting the police. Like, this is what you see all the time in color revolutions. And now the establishment is supporting this. I reported on the insanely lied about George Floyd protests, which is one of the most lied about events in modern human history. And one of the ways I got started in citizen journalism is I had a viral report in my first year. I reported on the ground how at the Kansas City George Floyd protest, we was peacefully protesting at this park where we all designated protests at, and the police launched an offensive, including tear gassing innocent women and children at the park that had nothing to do with the protest. It was one of the first stories I ever broke that went viral on Twitter, where I explained how I was taking a break. I was in the park next to the civilians. We was tear gassed, and there was a lot of people who wasn't even part of the protest who was tear gassed and was attacked by the police. And I was explaining how the protest got rowdy because of the police, and then the right-wing media went and lied, said he was a violent protest. Do you guys see the difference between an organic discontent against an unpopular government, where the government is usually the starters of the violence? Like when it comes to Black Lives Matter in the George Floyd protest, most of the time it was the police engaging in violence against us. Meanwhile, in these color revolutions, it never fails. Every single time, it's these people who try their best to there's no goal to increase the working class, the quality of the working class. It's about destruction, and the goal is to provoke the state, so the state will respond in kind to the protesters. Then the Western media will turn around, and Claudia Sheinbaum didn't take the bait, but this is what they want to do. They want the police to respond to these violent protesters, and then they turn around and say, "Oh, look at the fascism in Mexico. Look how Claudia Sheinbaum is treating these protesters." It's a proven tactic over and over again. But I got a lot to present. But Tim, do you have anything you want to add before I move on? I still got a few more things I want to share. Do you want to chime in?
No, I think that's pretty good, Nick. I think that's pretty good. But just to say that when you see also the characters associated with it, like Vicente Fox, the former extreme right-wing president of Mexico, then you have to recalculate everything basically. But you're right. What were the demands there? Really, Sheinbaum is not a revolutionary, but she's introduced a lot of measures which made her popular, like her mentor AMLO. AMLO introduced things for pensioners and a lot of social benefits that made him popular when he was mayor of Mexico City. So, look at the issues. Who is behind it, who's funding it, and what were the demands of the protesters? Because, as you say, this color revolution stuff is universal, really, and the complaints coming from the US, from the oligarchy in the US, was they were greedy enough to want Pemex, the state oil company, to be privatized so they could get a slice of it. So that's why, you know, the Lindsey Grahams of the world and so on will attack the Mexican president, because she's held the line on that. She's not going to privatize Pemex, basically. So she's using it for the national oil company for public purposes, you know. So look at the demands. You're right. There weren't coherent demands there. There were extreme right figures there, and the violence didn't seem to have any real rhyme or reason, basically. We had a big rally here in Belém in Brazil with, I think, around 50,000 people. There wasn't any violence there, and there was a lot of very clear demands, and there was a very big contingent that was holding Palestinian flags and Palestinian banners too, you know, so you knew what people were there for, basically, and there was no gratuitous violence in that.
You got to understand that Claudia Sheinbaum, and I had a lot of respect for AMLO, because I thought AMLO governed way better than I expected. Like, I remember there were a lot of people who was suspicious of him at first. I remember vividly, like, we got to be suspicious of AMLO. And he did a great job. And Claudia Sheinbaum seems to be moving in the same direction, because she increased the minimum wage in Mexico. And like you said, she's no revolutionary guy. Like, she's not a fucking Lenin or Mao. You know what I mean? But she has effectively increased the quality of life for the working class in Mexico, which is why you've seen a historic poverty drop in Mexico. You have a minimum wage increase. You have a functioning system that benefits the Mexican people, which led to a 30% crime drop in Mexico under Claudia Sheinbaum in her first term, which completely destroys the narrative about this quote-unquote protest, because they always use the same thing. They said people are upset over crime and corruption. That's how one of the MSNBC statements I saw. They're like, well, people are protesting against crime. She dropped crime. Crime is dropping under Claudia Sheinbaum. And you mentioned this here. I have a lot of shares on the story. This is absurd, because there are stupid Western leftists who always fall for this kind of stuff. These are the Western leftists who fell for the Iranian protest. You don't stand with the women in Iran? No, I don't stand for no Western-backed CIA bullshit. No, I don't. And look, here's the Mexican president you mentioned before, who trying to convince everyone that he's such a young child, which shows how ridiculous these, and it shows how lazy the ruling class is. I explain on the RBN all the time how they do the same psyops over and over again, because they don't really have to change. Look, you guys know this, over the last like 2 years, they learned that the best way to support CIA cover revolutions, since people are now privy to them, people understand what the United States and CIA does to destabilize the country. So as a way to cover it up, they now hide it behind calling it a Gen Z protest. Like, this is how every single corporate media headline, in the most creepiest way, like if you, from the BBC, from MSNBC, this is CNN, you will see it on Fox News, you see this 100% coordinated media, and you should ask yourself, how did they pull that off? Why are they all coordinated? What is that about? But they all say that this is a protest that started spontaneously from Gen Z. And where have we heard that before? You guys see how lazy they are? They don't even change it up, Tim. But where Gen Z protests are rocking the world.
They love copying things. They'll just borrow it. They plagiarize all the time.
Yeah, and the liberal boomers love this shit, Tim. The liberal boomers, I wouldn't say boomers, but the Gen Z shit lives. They fall for this shit too. They're like, yeah, we gotta stand for the Mexican Revolution. We gotta stand for the Syrian Revolution. Like, so it's a smart strategy. I give them props. Like, now they're making it all about Gen Z. It's not CIA. Don't say CIA. It's not the United States. Don't bring up Iraq. Don't bring up Libya. It's Gen Z. And another thing they're doing, which is disgusting to me. Oh my God! I don't know if you relate to this at all, man.
And then what they can do when they have a disaster like Libya or Syria, they can say, "Oh well, the revolution was betrayed," you know. But we were right in the first place, and it was betrayed.
Yeah, exactly, Tim. And man, this is infuriating to me, bro. Another thing they've learned, in the way the ruling class learned from previous mistakes and the way they learned how to start war, is unbelievably disturbing. So they're using the flag from One Piece. I don't know if you guys know what One Piece is. One Piece is probably the most popular anime of their generation. It's up there with Dragon Ball Z. It's a fantastic story where this pirate is planning a revolution against a fascist world government that relies on slavery. Like this boy Luffy's brother is literally part of the Revolutionary Army. Like One Piece as an anime is not subtle. It's all about uprising against a corrupt ruling class, a corrupt global system. Like One Piece as a story is based as hell. I'm summing up for everyone who don't know. It's a base story all about revolution. It's all about these corrupt governments. Like Luffy's grandpa is a fucking traitor. He serves the government. But his brother, he's part of the revolution. It's the whole story about revolution. It's extremely popular all around the world. I mean, there are translations in Mexico, translations all over Latin America. I mean, I don't think you guys understand. I'm talking about hundreds of millions of people probably watch One Piece. It's a gigantic show. So the establishment is using this as a way to, they are planting these One Piece flags all over their color revolution. Here's another one. Look, you see, like, they have the giant Luffy. This is the symbol for the Straw Hat Pirates. And all these social, this is what I'm supposed to be sharing. Like, this is, like, bro, I'm almost terrified because they're working overtime to win people over on these. Like, this is actually infuriating. And look, this is what we've seen in other revolutions all over the world. They are learning, the establishment is learning how to sell these wars. Here is Angela. We only have a few more I'll share. There's still, look, from Mexico, same flag theme in Nepal, Indonesia, Bangladesh. This is Yusei Tsuru's nonsense in a nutshell. Like, you had Nazis in Mexico, where the One Piece flag, you gotta see how incoherent this is. So I guess the Nazis was protesting against Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico because they was upset that Mexico voted against that Nazi resolution, I guess. Like, Mexican Nazis now. But this is what they're doing. Look, this is the flag. They use the same tactics. I don't know what country. I think this is Bangladesh. I don't know which one he pictured there. But like, these are protests all over the world. There's a spontaneous Gen Z protest. It's
a franchise.
It's almost an insult. And look, and as they try to convince you that this rally is spontaneously started by Gen Z, every single damn video you will see from these protests always features some fucking neoliberal boomer, some neoliberal Gen X. Look all these young Gen Z people coming to organically protest. So let's listen to these. Listen to these people.
Can I ask what you think?
So this neoliberal Gen X boomer motherfucker was asked a very reasonable question. Like, don't you think that you're out of touch? Like, if 80% of the country support Claudia Sheinbaum, aren't you guys out of touch? And look at the denialism from these people. And Tim, you can chime in after this. Look.
Can I ask what you think about the nearly 80% approval rate of Sheinbaum?
No.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a franchise, and it's amazing that they're recycling all of these same symbols and images and so on. And really, it's an insult to people's intelligence, what they're doing. But nevertheless, as you say, it's got a track record. You know, that there's money in it. Basically, look at Venezuela at the moment, for example. They'd love to do it there. They've got their own agents, their own characters, and so on. But most of them have been too extreme, even for the opposition. And they've split the opposition in Venezuela because of the extremism and the violence of some of them there. But there's a great entitlement too amongst a lot of the Latin American elite, because there's such a culture of coups in Latin America, and they've all been orchestrated by the US embassies or the US envoys there, basically. So there's this sense of they're split as to whether to participate in the next elections or whether to wait for the next coup. The next coup is going to work for them. You know, Trump tried a coup in Venezuela in 2020. It was a pathetic one, failed very badly, you know, but really there's a whole long history of coups across Latin America. And so some of the elite simply expects to be parachuted into power by these sorts of things. You see the current one, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Maria Corina Machado, is now she wants an invasion of Venezuela. So this is the Peace Prize winner, the invasion of her own country. She's going to hand over all of the big oil reserves to the US and the US companies, and then she's going to allow several US military bases in the country. The guy in Ecuador just tried this, Noboa, Daniel Noboa, whose dad's a big banker and unpopular in the country, but he wanted to give the US a military base in the Galapagos Islands, the World Heritage listed Galapagos Islands, you know. But unfortunately for him, back in 2006, almost 20 years ago, the Correa government put together a new proposal for a new constitution. It was passed by a referendum. And in that constitution, apart from a number of interesting progressive things like giving Mother Earth rights in the natural world, rights in their own standing without having to be associated with ownership, there was the ban on foreign military bases. So there was a big US military base at Manta for a while there. They've been banned for the last almost 20 years, and Noboa wanted to bring it back, and the people the other day voted against it. 60% said no to the changes that he wanted. So that's one little victory for the people there against the terrible government they've got in Ecuador. It was a tragedy because really there were some very good things happening under a really what was a liberal social democratic government under Rafael Correa, but really they'd made some tremendous advances in terms of education, health, hospitals and so on like that. And infrastructure, a lot of those things all fell apart when he was betrayed by his vice, who was the first of the right-wing governments in recent times. But at least the Ecuadorian people stood up to that planned change to their constitution to allow US bases back in the country. What do they need US bases in Ecuador for? It's nothing to do with their security.
Yeah, very well said. I just have a few more receipts. We can wrap up here very soon. This will be my last part. I'm not sure you guys why the last part of the segment will be explaining why the color revolution in Mexico makes no sense and why it's full of shit. So there was analysis already done. You guys see there's Spanish doctors who was already on the case. It wasn't a lab. You have all these Mexicans who supported Claudia Sheinbaum. They seen this protest. They was like, bro, what the fuck? Let me look into this. And apparently, look, analysis of hashtags from the protest reveals nearly 1 million interactions with a clear pattern. International right-wing activists, I'm not sure what this is, the Selena Playo network, and 50% of foreign accounts. So you guys already knew this. I just had to show you guys the receipt. This is a foreign operation. This is another USAID color revolution. And this is why, just a few more quick receipts to wrap up here. Doesn't make sense because Claudia Sheinbaum is a president who reduced poverty. So apparently, isn't it interesting whenever you see one of these leaders who reject neoliberalism and reduce poverty, then all of a sudden they're hit with a Gen Z protest. Like, if you reduce poverty in your country, then all of a sudden Gen Z is going to uprise. So this doesn't make sense at all. And by the way, for the people who say that, oh, well, they're protesting against corruption in the cartels. You mean the cartels that the United States propped up? Like, it's insane to me whenever I see MAGA people like, don't you know that Claudia is owned by the cartels? No, the cartels would not exist without the United States. And I'm going to be quick. I know we're running a little bit long here. But look, I'll just read the headline because it's a whole nother conversation. United States government helped the rise of the Mexican drug cartel. So why are they protesting Claudia Sheinbaum instead of the government who funds this? Why are they not protesting the fact that previous neoliberal Mexican presidents had links to the CIA? Or is this kind of stuff interesting? Look, Mexican President Jose Lopez Portillo had links with the CIA. Exposed U.S. DIA used criminals to spy on and destabilize Mexico, Venezuela, and Bolivia. You're not protesting this? One more. Mexico, look, this is an example of one of the headlines. Look, Mexico's democracy is fast eroding under Sheinbaum's rule. What? So, democracy apparently is where you sell off your country's resources to the West, like Zelensky in Ukraine. Like democracy is when you sell out your people to the state of Israel and you kiss the wall. You want to know who hasn't kissed the wall? Claudia Sheinbaum. She never kissed the wall. She is greeted and loved by the Palestinian movement. You want to know who kissed the wall? Your boy, Donald Trump. Meanwhile,
and Claudia's Jewish, isn't she? I think Claudia's Jewish too.
Yeah, and she's anti-Zionist. She's anti-Zionist, and you have all the youthful idiots like the Nick Fuentes, the Goiber white supremacists. They group them all together because that's exactly what the Zionists want. They're like, you can't trust Claudia Sheinbaum. Don't you know she's a Jew? I explained many times before how the youthful idiots, they're here to confuse and obfuscate these issues. Because here's a tale of two leaders. Like, look at these two leaders. One is considered a Democratic leader by the Washington Post in the United States. And we'll end it on this because I can talk about this all day. This will be my last receipt I share, and I'll get you in there, Tim. Look at the tale of the two leaders. This is a tweet. I'm glad it did pretty well. Look, you have Claudia Sheinbaum, who reduces poverty in her country by rejecting neoliberalism. Compare that to the beta male Zionist cuck Javier Milei, who not only bankrupted his country, but he's now relying on United States bailouts and dancing and begging for it like a bitch, like a little bitch with no sovereignty. So embrace the Claudia Sheinbaums of the world and reject beta Zionist-owned cucks like Javier Milei. So anyway, I'm going to end it here. We're about 90 minutes in. Tim, I want to get your final thoughts. Whatever on your mind, whether Mexico, these color revolutions. It was great having you on, man. You have such a breadth of knowledge on these world events, so thank you for joining us.
No, you're right. You're totally right on the rash of color revolutions. It's a good theme to run because they pop up wherever, and really people are, I would say left liberal people, are far too quick to jump on bandwagons about these sorts of things. They need to think about it a bit more. I remember writing that about Syria 2011 when I heard, the protesters were killing police and doctors. I thought, why are they, if it's government violence, why are they killing police and doctors, So it took a little while, it didn't take very long to see that was fake, but unfortunately, I think a large part of the Western sort of liberal side of politics jumped on that bandwagon, whether because they believe it or it was convenient for them for other reasons, but we've got a real problem in terms of popular education and public understanding of these sorts of things because they have been pushed so much because they're popular and people at least don't protest the new war if it's under the banner of a color revolution or they don't understand it properly and that gives consent to the imperialist powers to keep doing what they're doing and to do such great damage to the whole planet. And at the moment, the big issue of the day, of course, is Gaza and the fact that even when UN agencies recognise ongoing genocide, there still is terrible denial and complicity all the way through, and people aren't waking up to that, but they want to be distracted by some new color revolution in Mexico. It's extraordinary, really. I think Julian Assange might be right. We should really turn off all of these mass media channels and boycott all of the newspapers. What good does it do anyone really to read this rubbish? Because it's unreconstructed lies, and the problem by the time you debunk the lies, they've already done the damage with the campaigns that they're running, basically. I think we've got a terrible problem in the name of these newspapers and television stations and so on. And there are potentially much better sources of information, fortunately, thanks to the internet, thanks to social media and so on, and programs such as yours, So really, we have a major problem in terms of the media and what it's doing to people's brains. I think it's really extremely serious, and we need to think about some drastic ways to address it.
Yeah, very well said. Tim Anderson, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you guys check out Tim Anderson's page. Here it is. Here's his X profile. Make sure you guys follow Tim Anderson, writer, internationalist, and academic. Thank you guys for watching. We have a banger weekend scheduled for you guys. On Friday, we're gonna have my good friend Fiorella Isabel. She will be back with an update on geopolitics, and Jody Brar will return on Saturday. You guys know we love Jody, so. We have a back-to-back this weekend for you guys. So this is going to be a good week for our channel. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Support our Patreon if you support my working class and journalist labor. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys this weekend. There's going to be a lot of great streams. Thank you, Tim, for joining us. Have a great night, my friends.